The classics have historically been interpreted as morally superior to other fields. So what happens when it's reclaimed by what our culture often considers to be the most lowbrow of entertainment? How do we reconcile our traditional understanding of the classics with the new genre of Greek mythology-inspired smut romance novels staring us in the face?
It's important to understand some basic definitions before we start, which I paraphrased from the Cambridge Dictionary. The definition of smut is media that offends some people because it represents sex. This can take place in video representation, audio representation, art, literature, or any other form of media. Erotica is defined as art which is intended to arouse sexual desire. Both of these concepts can be formed at the same time or separately and will be discussed in the rest of the video.
Persephone is the stereotypical hourglass-figured blonde. She's depicted with extreme curves and voluptuous lips and almost always in revealing clothing, as you can see in the photos. Hades is equally objectified. He's also always in revealing clothing, if not missing his shirt entirely. He's dark and brooding, and he's the epitome of the book boyfriend stereotype.
Don't cry. You're perfect.
When depicted separately, they're both acknowledged as immortals with their own powers. However, once we switch over to depictions of both of them together, Hades towers over Persephone, physically dominating the picture frame. This is an interesting parallel with the hymn to Demeter. Persephone would have been younger than depicted in A Touch of Darkness, probably around 12 years old. She would have been much smaller than Hades and physically underdeveloped, which is an odd touch of unintentional authenticity to the Homeric hymn. Demeter is the character who is most changed from the myth to the novel. She transforms from the protagonist to the villain, effectively changing the story from a mother-daughter relationship to a romantic relationship. This shows that a modern audience is less worried about the transition from the parents to the husband's household and more invested in the relationship before marriage. A Touch of Darkness is a prime example of this genre. It features a romance between Hades and Persephone, which began as a self-published novel until it exploded in popularity on social media sites like Instagram and TikTok. These clips are a few examples of fan edits and cosplays about the book and its characters.
No.
Can I pick that dog?
No.
Can I pick that dog?
It'll be alright. Just take my hand, hold it tight. No matter where I am, I'll be with you. Just think of me, don't you cry.
And you ask if I want you.
I can't read your mind, and I want to hear it from your lips.
Then let me be as clear as I can be. You are the only god I've ever worshipped, Persephone.
A Touch of Darkness is first and foremost a smut novel. Its main purpose is not to interpret the mythology or the original works, but instead to provide erotic pleasure to its readers. That's important to remember when interpreting it, because the author's main focus is not that of a classicist. The Hymn to Demeter is the oldest version of Persephone's myth that has survived to us today. It doesn't actually feature Persephone as its main focus, instead following Demeter's journey in her attempts to find and reclaim her daughter. The hymn focuses on Demeter as the main character and centers around the sanctity of the mother-daughter bond. In the novel, Demeter is vilified as an overbearing mother who entraps Persephone. Part of the reason the hymn is so fascinating is because of the strength Demeter exhibits, and when she's vilified, and therefore set up as an obstacle to be defeated, she's doomed to fail in her quest to reunite with her daughter. Demeter certainly exhibits agency in the hymn, acting against both Hades and Zeus. The question of Persephone's agency is more debatable. However, there's a moment at the end of the hymn where she lies about the nature of the pomegranate incident and who initiated it and whether or not it was by force, which severely complicates the narrative of the story. This lie isn't forced upon her as her kidnapping is, which makes it a choice and therefore an act of agency. Scarlet St. Clair amplifies Persephone's agency, not only by making her a main character, but by depicting her relationship with Hades as consensual. Helene Foley argues that Persephone is a representation of all young girls in Greece who are approaching the age of marriage. This raises questions about whether she remains so today in popular understanding of the myth. Is it simply that the age of marriage has raised, or does Persephone now represent an entirely different demographic of young women? As the main character, Persephone is supposed to be relatable, especially in a work of erotica where the goal is to be as immersive to the reader as possible. Speaking of erotica, Persephone's sexuality is also up for debate. Many authors argue that the eating of the pomegranate represents the consummation of Persephone and Hades' marriage. Is a work of erotica the natural next step? Especially if the presence of consent in the myth is probable, which depends entirely on the amount of agency we ascribe to Persephone.
Shut up!
If you search up Persephone on Instagram, about half of the results will depict Hades and Persephone together, and almost all of the results will represent Persephone as someone who wants to be in the underworld. While the hymn to Demeter is almost always read as a rape, and accepted as such by experts in the field, it's not represented as such in popular culture. It's often even set up on a pedestal as a relationship to aspire to, as seen in the previous couple's costume video. What representation of the myth is the truth, and does it even matter? Be the Persephone you want to see in the world. Add pomegranate seeds to your salad. Wear autumn's decay like a perfume and spring's soft blooming like jewelry. Weave flower crowns in a cemetery. Write love poems to death. Capture your beloved dark god. Persephone, the making of a queen. Most do not understand the darkness or its gifts. Most prefer to avoid such raw truth, intense passion, and the deep, dark mysteries of the unbridled feminine. Before embracing the dark, I was limited to spring. I was an adolescent, a maiden, an innocent. Not a sovereign woman in my fullness, and certainly not a queen. Before I could come anywhere near putting that crown on my head, I had to make the journey into the underworld to face my demons, my skeletons, my untruths, and my insecurities. It was only after this that I was able to claim my rightful place on the throne of self, full self, sovereign self, authentic self. Designs like these represent the different ways Persephone is being interpreted, but both of these examples show agency and show desire to be in the underworld at the end. While this may not be authentic to the original myth, it's becoming a more and more accepted reading of it. The two versions of Persephone's myth represented here are vastly different. They contradict each other in some areas and complement each other in others. Some of the characters are emphasized or forgotten entirely. But the lack of Greek mythological canon in antiquity leaves room for modern interpretations and changes. I reject the idea that the oldest answer is inherently the correct answer, and the popularity of the retellings of Persephone's myth in any form of media support me. The ancient and modern understandings of the myth may seem paradoxical, but they both hold value to large communities, making them equally important.